John Miller is the deputy commissioner of the NYPD, and some of you may not know who he is, although you may have seen him on television. What's interesting is this is the guy who, when he was a news reporter, interviewed Osama bin Laden, and that's his claim to fame. After that happened, the FBI decided that was a qualification to make him the assistant director for the FBI's Public Affairs Office. And it's in that capacity that I first ran into John Miller in 2006 when he hosted a suit-wearing jihadi named Irfan Shahid, Shahid being someone who martyrs themselves in jihad, by the way, who John Miller brought this professor from the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding at Georgetown, run by the largest single donor for the global jihad, Prince Walid bin Talal of Saudi Arabia, by the way. Mr. Miller brought Irfan Shahid into FBI headquarters, into the Bonaparte Auditorium, to talk about these matters, about Islam and about other things. And I'm going to actually play you original audio clip of what he said in FBI headquarters, and then a few people raising significant questions, including me, and you'll hear all of that. Then I want to fast forward to these last, 6 weeks, 5 weeks, when we've had 2 jihadi attacks in New York, and you listen to his response. And the reason I'm doing this, and I want to make clear, this is not to pick on John Miller, but because I have a lot of experience here, I want to share this as an example of how somebody thinks that an individual is a nice guy, is a smart guy about Islam, is a scholar, and so they take that person's word and they build their entire professional reputation and understanding of this threat based on that. And when that basis for your understanding is wrong, that this is simply what you get, and we continue to chase our tail in this war. So let me first start off with John Miller, October 5th, 2006, FBI headquarters, introducing Dr. Irfan Shahid.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. Those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. So what we're going to try to do today in this discussion is to take the broader look, the wider look, and not talk about as much the instant moment, perhaps, as the perspective on the longer game that we are involved in here. Dr. Irfan Shahid is a brilliant scholar. He has been at UCLA. Right now, he's at Georgetown and is good enough to give his time. And Joe Billy will talk a little bit more about that, but his resume would be the envy of anyone from the academic world. In the Office of Public Affairs, which is my shop, we have the Community Relations Unit, and we are always working on building bridges. And the more we build, the more we learn new ways of outreach, better ways of outreach.
So just to summarize, John Miller is not only lifting Irfan Shahid up and talking about how awesome he is, he's saying we at the FBI are doing this outreach and essentially submitting ourselves to these people and their information. Folks, this is the game. This is how the subversion works. He even uses the phrase building bridges, which is a phrase that is lifted right out of the Muslim Brotherhood's milestones, strategic document for them. So now let's listen to what Irfan Shahid has to say.
This raises the question, to what extent is really Islam a religion of jihad? Well, let's see how it developed. In the first 12 years, there is no trace of jihad in Islam. The second stage began when the Prophet emigrated from here to Medina in the north, about 300 miles to the north. Well, he immediately became the head of a state. If you are the head of a state, then you have duties, and by the way, the Sharia, the legal part of the Quran was revealed mostly in Medina now, because you have a state now, it needs its law, its Sharia. Now, if you look at violence now in the world, you will see how it came about. With the background as Islam, that jihad is not peculiar to Islam, you see how it came about. After the First World War, the whole of the Muslim world was under occupation by European powers.
Now, I'm hoping everybody just caught that. He jumped from Mecca to Medina to World War I and is blaming jihad on Western colonial occupation of Muslim lands after invoking the Sharia. Folks, this is staggering, and he's doing it at FBI headquarters. Now, after Dr. Shahid finished his comments, he took questions, and here are some of them and his answers.
And it seems to me that defeating Al-Qaeda we would defeat them more easily if, people in the Middle East rejected their beliefs. What can we do as Americans to educate the Middle Easterns why they should reject the beliefs of Al-Qaeda?
Well, when you draw a comparison between the Ku Klux Klan and the Ku Klux Klan and the Qaeda, this is, I think, not a fair comparison because the Ku Klux Klan you refer to is racist. And I think that the Qaeda is not racist. The Qaeda is a religious organization which believes that the faith and the people to which they belong have been wronged. You have to go to the causes and withdraw the causes.
You heard him right. He just said that Al-Qaeda is a religious organization. And of course, if you withdraw the causes that's causing them to be jihadis, well, then it all goes back to good, which means if you would just submit to Sharia and stop getting in the way of the movement, all will be good.
They object to the government, including us, discussing the dilemma in terms of Islamic terrorism. They say, don't call it Islamic terrorism, just refer to the terrorists. Are we over the line there? Are we being offensive?
It is interpreted in the Arab world as unfair. Let me give you an example. I gave you the example. From the point of view of Islam, the suicide bomber is a martyr. From his point of view, he is a pious man who reads his Quran and who feels that so much injustice has been done to his people, and his duty is to express his discontent. He is not a soldier in a well-organized army where he can go to the battlefield and fight. He can do it individually. So this is what he does.
Sir, I have just one question. In response to an answer you just gave, how can Americans or the Western world be expected to reconcile the difference between our description as a suicide bomber as compared to perhaps the suicide bomber's view of himself as a martyr? We care less about why the person chooses to die. If he strapped a bomb on himself and blew himself up in the middle of the desert, it's more about who gets killed in the process. And to me, it's never going to be acceptable to look at that as an act of martyrdom so long as innocent people die in the process. How would we be expected to reconcile that view?
You are right. There is a difficulty about that. But I think all these difficulties will disappear if the conflict in Iraq is the main problem now and the whole Muslim world.
So I just want to make sure everybody's tracking. Martyrs are good to go, and they're just doing their duty. And if we would just, at the time, get out of Iraq, all would be good. It is our fault. I hope everybody's paying attention here.
We have a presentation to make, so we will make that our last question.
Sir, I'm just wondering if you could clarify a few comments for me. What I hear is, in response to the question down here about the fairly overwhelming support for Al-Qaeda in the Middle East, that we must withdraw our policies in Al-Qaeda as a religious organization, that Wahhabism is not aggressive, and in response to Mr. Mason's question about suicide bombers, that U.S. foreign policy is to blame. And that's what I'm hearing. Can you maybe clarify that? Because it seems that possibly decades of indoctrination in the Middle East on the TV, on the radio, elementary school, junior high texts, and textbooks teaching this ideology may also be to blame.
I think the overarching question is
how to reconcile the two.
Exactly, against the view that this has been fermented over there through madrasas and misinformation and other things, and that it's possible that American policy can't be to blame for all bad things. And that Al-Qaeda is a religious organization as opposed to a terrorist organization.
Well, Al-Qaeda is a religious organization, but this is my feeling that it feels helpless to do anything except in this way.
So if all of you are out there wondering how the FBI got to be so clueless about jihad and Islam, here's one great example for you. This is just catastrophic failure. And folks, at the end of this presentation, he was given the Jefferson Cup as a thank you for such a great presentation. The Jefferson Cup, and he was given it by the assistant director for the FBI's counterterrorism division. Now let's jump forward to New York, and let's hear how John Miller characterizes the Muslim, Saipov, who plowed over people and killed people in New York City on a bike path.
But I think this is an important time to say this isn't about Islam. It's not about what mosque he attends. There are hundreds of thousands of law-abiding Muslims in New York City who are adversely affected by things like this. And it's probably a good time to say we have seen in the aftermath of incidents like this, bias incidents.
This isn't about Islam, got nothing to do with Islam, and our job is to protect the Muslim community against backlash that has never happened since 9/11. Now let's look at the most recent attack and how John Miller responded.
Tell us about this suspect. What have you learned so far and his motive?
You know, this is an individual who came from Bangladesh, was living here, went through a number of jobs, was not particularly struggling financially or under any known pressure, who was not on our radar at the NYPD, not on the FBI radar, and he's somewhat characteristic of what we've been seeing across the world, which is somebody who turns up one day out of the blue.
So no financial problems, no employment problems. We're not sure what's going on. He just fell out of the sky, out of the blue. No, he's being trained at mosques and Islamic centers and schools like every other jihadi on the planet. Here's one more comment from Mr. Miller.
How hard is it to stop a lone wolf like this?
Well, it's very difficult, and it's getting harder. This is not the Al-Qaeda model where a cell of people who are communicating with the base are an intelligence problem. This is a situation, whether it was Ahmed Rahami, the Chelsea bomber, or Mr. Saipov, who ran over the people with the truck, or yesterday's case where you've got people who are consumers of this propaganda, and these plots unfold where they're not necessarily working with anybody else or confiding in anybody else, and that's something we're still looking at here, where the conspiracy is within the confines of their own mind, and that's a very hard place to get to.
What Understanding the Threat is hoping, folks, is that this segment has given you an understanding of the process of going from being indoctrinated by people who are manipulating you and how you think and how you see the threat, to being in senior positions, assistant director in the FBI, deputy commissioner for NYPD, and completely missing the threat.